When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Aloe or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling, and for shoppers, buying, simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. Nobody does online business better than Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/income.
At Capella University, you can learn at your own pace with our FlexPath learning format. Take 1 or 2 courses at a time and complete as many as you can in a 12-week billing session. With FlexPath, you can even finish the bachelor's degree you started in 22 months for $20,000. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu. Fastest 25% of students. Cost varies by pace, transfer credits, and other factors. Fees apply.
Hello folks, it's Gareth. Welcome along to Somewhere on Earth. It's Tuesday the 20th of May 2025 and I speak to you from London. Here we go. And also speaking to me in London is Ghislaine Boddington, a different part of London. But what's occurring with you then, Ghislaine? Are you okay?
Yes, I'm good. I'm actually very happy to be here with you, to be talking through some of these very important topics. But it's such a lovely weather. I actually, of course, would love to be outside too. But we do apparently have a bit more time with this good weather. So I'll get some time outside soon.
Oh, that's good to know. So not too many sacrifices for the podcast, but
not
yes,
too many, no.
Gorgeous weather as we record this. Who knows what it'll be like when people are listening to this. And I must say it's lovely to see so much greenery around. The trees are looking brilliant. You know, of course, many of the trees are evergreen, which reminds me that we are proud partners of the Evergreen Podcast Network. You can click on their Evergreen logo to find out more. Go to their website, and if you like this podcast, imagine how much you'll love the other titles. You know, slightly offbeat, quirky, the kind of podcasts you won't just get on any old pod provider. You get them on Evergreen, and we're in very good company there. So there we are. That's all nice. Let's put our money where our mouth is and give you some podcast brilliance. Here we go. And coming up today, the rise of deepfakes, specifically ones where AIs generate pornographic images of people. We'll tell you about a new study into so-called deepfake model variants. And what the hell, we're praising MySQL. That was the best rhyme I could come up with, I'm afraid. Now, unless you work in tech, you may never have heard of MySQL, but this is the database that it's certainly touched your life, and it's celebrating its 30th birthday. We'll tell you about this unassuming application's turbulent history and why it continues to matter to all of us. It's all right here on the Somewhere on Earth podcast. So, non-consensual intimate imagery, usually of women or celebrities, is on the rise, and it's becoming an increasingly big problem. In other words, I'm talking about machine learning generated pornographic images. A new study has found nearly 35,000 publicly downloadable deepfake model variants, i.e. these are AA models that with a bit of tweaking can produce deepfakes of identifiable people. Now, whilst 35,000 such models out there on the internet might not sound that scary in the grand scheme of things, it's still of course 35,000 too many, especially given the millions of inappropriate images that any of these models could potentially produce. Now, this all comes from research to be presented at the ACM Fairness, Accountability and Transparency Conference in Greece next month. And leading the study is Will Hawkins, a doctoral student at the Oxford Internet Institute.
Really, we set out at the beginning of this work to assess the use cases for fine-tuning openly downloadable text-to-image or image generation AI models. And I'll explain a little bit about what I mean, because those terms have various meanings. When I say fine-tuning, I mean the process for providing an AI model with new data to improve its capabilities on a specific task. So for example, if you wanted an image generation model to be better at generating images of a particular shoe brand, you could provide it with example images of that brand so you could create them more accurately. And really what we wanted to see was, why do people use this fine-tuning technique, or you do fine-tuning for these models? And then how do they use them in the wild? And maybe one other clarification that's useful is when I've been referring, or I refer to openly downloadable models, what we mean here is models which an individual can download to their local device. So many AI models that people access, like ChatGPT or Gemini, they're proprietary, so users have to access them in ways that are controlled by developers. But open models have the benefit of giving users much greater control because they are downloaded, to their machine, and they're really popular for many good reasons.
And there are concerns, aren't there, from this research about these deepfake model variants?
Yes, indeed. So what we find is that deepfake model variants are a huge reason people conduct fine-tuning of text-to-image models. We look at two particular families of models. These models are called Flux and Stable Diffusion, that are hosted on two specific platforms where models are uploaded and downloaded by users. And you can see examples of what these models create. But on these platforms, we find a huge number of models which are specifically fine-tuned for the purposes of deepfakes. So in the case of Civitai, one very popular platform, we find almost 35,000 easily accessible, downloadable deepfake model variants, and they've accumulated about 15 million downloads over the last couple of years. And when I say download here, if a user has downloaded a deepfake variant, with that variant, they can generate potentially limitless images. So the model might be the source for content that's found on many, many other domains, like the now defunct Mr. Deepfake site, or shared on private channels through platforms like Telegram or Discord. So these models are hugely popular, which was a big finding for us.
And so we're seeing deepfake images appearing of identifiable people, quite often celebrities. So we're talking about malicious use of this kind of approach and this kind of technology, aren't we?
Yes, exactly. And it is often celebrities, but it's not always celebrities. So we did a little bit of, or quite a lot of analysis around who was being targeted and why are they being targeted. And what we found was in a gender analysis of a subset of our data, we saw that 96% of all of the model variants that we assessed targeted women. And of those people that were targeted, whilst most of them were celebrities, some of them were Instagram users with fewer than 10,000 followers. They were people with TikTok accounts or OnlyFans accounts. They weren't necessarily famous. And one of the things we wanted to look at in detail is, well, why are these people being targeted? What are people doing? And what we see is that whilst it's on the face of things explicitly, it's not clear why any individual is targeted. When you look at metadata associated with these models, things like model tags or comments or descriptions, people can talk on the platforms about these models. It's very clear that the intention is that people are generating non-consensual intimate imagery or deepfake pornography of these identifiable individuals.
How are these, or how can they be sort of detected or removed? I mean, can this be, for want of a better word, policed or regulated in any way?
So there are ways that platforms can enforce rules around this issue. We see pretty good enforcement on these popular platforms around depictions of children by not allowing any models which generate the photorealistic images of children. But if you want to allow deepfakes that are not pornographic versus allowing deepfake models that do allow pornography, it's really, really hard to police. So either platforms could say we won't allow any model variants that are specifically intended for the generation of deepfakes, or they need to think about other types of ways of policing this, either by doing direct testing of models, which can be challenging for various legal and ethical reasons, or by engaging in efforts like provenance or watermarking attempts to try to be able to track what types of content is being generated by these models. But the big challenge here is that these are models which are downloaded locally. So it's very, very, very hard once a model is in possession of any individual to find out what what's happened with that model or what has been generated using that model.
How easy are these models to create?
That's a great question, and unfortunately the answer is increasingly extremely easy. So we have found various user guides on how to create these models, and often the directions are that you need around 20 images of any one individual, and it takes about 15 minutes to do the fine-tuning process. And you can do it on consumer-grade computers. It's not something you need massive amounts of compute for. And this is a reasonably new breakthrough. And there's certain fine-tuning approaches, like this low-rank adaptation, which is a very specific and very effective fine-tuning attempt, which is very efficient, which means that whilst a couple of years ago you needed many images, or it took a long period of time, or the quality of the outputs was not very good, what we see now is it's very easy to create very, very, very high quality outputs because of these technical innovations, which can be used in many amazing ways, but also can be used in these ways which can be extremely harmful.
What's the legal situation here? And I know it'll vary according to different jurisdictions, but in general, do countries have any legislation against this kind of activity?
Increasingly, there's strong legal guardrails against the generation of deepfake content, and particularly non-consensual intimate imagery or deepfake pornography. But the challenge is where generation hasn't happened. So in many of these models, if a model is able to generate an individual who is an identifiable individual, just by downloading the model, there isn't usually, or as far as I'm aware of legal regimes, just downloading a model that can generate an identifiable person is not a legal issue. And once someone has downloaded that model, that's when it becomes very difficult to know what they are doing with the models. So just creating these models that can produce this content is generally not a legal concern, and it's then very hard to track what people are doing with these models.
That's Will Hawkins. So, Ghislaine, listening to that, I must say, one of the more worrying interviews that we've done on this programme, and really making the case that these are, easily downloadable models that in themselves can go on to create like millions of these very harmful images. So what's your take?
Well, I think it's very, very good this report's been done. First thing to say that, because it needed to become much clearer what was happening, to have some, good study done around it. And we know that the centre that this came from, the Oxford Internet Centre, is very, very good indeed at its outputs. It's been needed, the clarity, for us to get politicians and policymakers, etc., to start to take this seriously. From the women's point of view, it's actually very hard to take in how these problems continue to be there, whether we're in physical life or whether it's in virtual life. The layers of problems around the misuse of women and women's imagery, the abuse of women through these forms. So sometimes I can't quite think about it. It's so painful. But that's why this important debate coming on the table now has got to be dealt with. So I looked a lot at what was happening in relationship to what was mentioned in the interview, actually, the kind of regulations and laws that are coming in different places. And we know that we have in England and Wales an amendment to the Online Safety Act, which took place in 2023, which means that the sharing of sexually explicit deepfake images is a criminal offence now. It's only 2 years imprisonment, which is why I think it's a bit low, but approaches are varying greatly by different countries. The only places that have specific laws are the UK, South Korea and China. And in the US, there's no federal law yet, even though a few states have criminalised the use of deepfakes, not just for sexual content, but for defamatory content around politicians as well, etc. So the big one is China, which has very strong enforcement. And it's doing a whole load of things that you kind of think like, well, why can't that happen too? Explicit labelling of deepfakes you have to do. You're not allowed to spread news or distort truth with deepfakes. You have to, as a platform, monitor and label and remove illegal content. And even as a user, you have to use your real name and ID on these content creation platforms. And they really are working hard on getting deepfakes held down, yeah. However, of course, with China, that is part of their censorship and content moderation infrastructure. So there's two sides to this always. The freedom of speech side, which I don't think is really an argument on this. I prefer to have labelled deepfakes, digital watermarking, whatever.
Yeah, and indeed, one thing that Will was saying in the interview is that, I mean, there are some legal guardrails, as you mentioned there, Ghislaine, but it's not illegal in itself just to download one of these models. So what comes out of the models can be illegal depending on the context, but that in itself is a slippery and a difficult area, which brings us, I suppose, Ghislaine, to detection systems and the prevention side of things. So are there deepfake detection tools out there?
The AI tools for detection are actually very well developed, yeah, and they're just not proactively out there in public enough. We don't get enough pop-up warnings or automatic overlays. Those are still rare. But some places like Microsoft with Project Origin are using digital watermarks to verify media provenance. And there are some small browser plugins which give you detection for deepfakes and public warnings to help journalists and researchers mainly. But I think that we need a lot more than that. It needs to be far more something which is automatically in our browsers telling us that this is a deepfake point, yeah? And I think it can be done. But I do have a 3-step checkpoint, Gareth, for actually how to spot one yourself.
Well, that'd be very interesting. I mean, how do I, without using AI to help me, might I just use my wit and intelligence to detect a deepfake?
Well, the first thing they say, of course, is check the source. Where did you find it? Is it from a dodgy account or a random post? If you don't recognise the news outlet, of course, you should be cautious. And if you have an anonymous share, that's a red flag. Yeah, keep away from it. The second thing is that you can, of course, do image searches. You can do that on Search with Google or on Google Lens on your phone. And that would tell you if it turned up in a different context. Say the image you were searching with came up and it was a news story from years ago. That means it's likely being used now, fake. You know, like when there's an earthquake picture and they say, oh, look at the earthquake that happened yesterday in the Philippines. And actually, suddenly it comes through that it was an earthquake from 5 years ago. And then, of course, there's the normal one of looking closely.
Yeah.
Do the eyes blink strangely? Is the voice out of sync? You know, that kind of AI issues like blurry ears or hair. Deepfake get those little details wrong. But the key is, if you're unsure about it, just don't share it. Yeah, don't click into it, because they are made to mess up your emotions. So don't allow that to happen in a way. It's like putting a block up in front of yourself before you get emotional about it. And always take a breath or a pause before you repost anything that you're not sure about.
Ghislaine, thank you.
Vitamin Water Zero Sugar has great taste, zero BS, and obviously zero sugar. For those with zero room in their calendar, zero patience for slow walkers, those who get 0 hours of sleep on a Saturday night, have zero filter, zero given, and zero interest in grabbing a plain, boring water. Grab a delicious Vitamin Water Zero Sugar today.
So, you just started using LinkedIn Premium. Now what? Well, on your premium company page, you noticed around 7.5 times more page engagement and 5 times more page views. Well done. And now, new clients are messaging you. All because you're using LinkedIn Premium, which helps you get the business growth you want. Think big, small business. Think big. Start your free trial at linkedin.com/premium small business. That's linkedin.com/premium small business.
This episode is brought to you by Temptations Cat Treats. Your cat will come running for the perfectly irresistible Temptations Creamy Puree and Temptations Lickable Spoon Cat Treats. The best time to feed lickable cat treats to your cat is anytime. Feed by hand for a playful moment, in a bowl for a creamy treat, or as a topper to make mealtime fun. Visit temptationstreats.com to learn more.
All right, now let's talk about the most consequential technology you've probably never heard of, unless, of course, you work in tech. It's the MySQL database. It's 30 years old this year, and it's no exaggeration to say that it really has changed the world. Given that your data is almost certainly on a MySQL database, or several of them, somewhere in the world, we think it really is time to give this database a little bit of love and a bit of attention. Like, for instance, if you're on Facebook, congratulations, you are definitely on MySQL. And if this application was a character in a film, it would be one of those that gets thrown out of helicopters, gets into all kinds of scrapes, yet still prevails despite being a little bit battered and bruised, maybe. Yes, it's a database with quite a history. So how has it become so ubiquitous? Well, I've been hearing from Peter Zaitsev. He was involved with MySQL from 1999 and eventually joined the company in 2002. He went on to co-found open source database consultancy Percona.
Most people don't interact with a database. And how I often would explain that to people saying, hey, you use Facebook, right? Like, for example. And you know what? All that kind of data, those kind of, messages, your likes, right? And it needs to be stored somewhere. And that is stored in the database. Right, and at Facebook, I mentioned them specifically, right, because they are on record as one of the long-time MySQL users and probably one of the biggest MySQL users out there. If you look in this case in a database of some kind, not only MySQL, but MySQL in many cases, it underpins pretty much any applications out there. Right, I think you cannot really go through your life without touching the databases. Like, hey, you go to the shop, buy ice cream. Well, you pay with a credit card. A lot of that stuff goes through databases, right? Like goes all those kind of records, what you paid to who, right? What you bought, and so on and so forth, right? So databases are important. And at the same time, I think what is interesting about databases, they are kind of also invisible, right? I like to talk to people often like a database is kind of like, your plumbing. You don't think about that. You just, use it. But you know what? If it breaks, it's a problematic, right? It's like, well, you know what? If your toilet gets clogged, right, and leaks out, then you have a big problem. That is why we often hear about the databases when some problem happens, right? So, for example, database goes down, and now something like like a big service is unavailable for hours or days. That is when they hear about the databases.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So most users won't be aware of MySQL. It hardly ever gets into the news. It's not mentioned, usually in relation to the likes of Facebook or Google or what have you. And yet the chances are, I mean, it is a certainty that all of us have some of our data somewhere on a MySQL database, even if you're not on Facebook. I think we can say that, can't we?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, right.
It's
MySQL is so ubiquitous. Yeah. It's used by governments and many organizations. So yes.
Why has it become so dominant then? What is it about MySQL? Because loads of people could code up a database and get it working. What's so special about MySQL?
In my opinion, behind almost any success, you will see some of hard work and some and the smart work, right? And maybe some genius, but and then also some sort of luck. And if you look at MySQL, both have been in place. Now, if you think about what has been happening before MySQL, we had databases for years, but a lot of us were very expensive commercial databases. IBM with DB2, and of course, like an Oracle database. And also there have been, some academic databases, but which have not been really very user-friendly. If you look at that time, late 90s when MySQL started to appear, that is also where other components of open source infrastructure started to be popular, right? Like a Linux operating system, Apache web server, and so on and so forth, right? And MySQL kind of got on that track, right? MySQL was very successful attaching itself to the very popular programming language of that time called PHP, right? Which was default database for programmers in that language, which brought it to the web ecosystem.
I'm just wondering if you foresee turbulent times ahead for MySQL, because I suppose, in fact, if we do go back in history a little bit, it has had a bit of a turbulent history, isn't it? It's seen off the .com crash, various acquisitions. So tell me about some of the turbulence along the way.
So let me go back, like in this case. Like, I think you mentioned a very interesting thing. You mentioned the .com crash, right? Of course, like 2000, 2001. And this, for MySQL, was actually their awesome time. That is what really put MySQL in a picture in a very, very big way. Because at that time, after .com crash, nobody could afford to use the expensive commercial databases anymore.
What about the appetite for open source systems then? And what does that mean for MySQL? Because it does seem as if, maybe the appetite for open source systems is not going anywhere. If anything, it's increasing, isn't it?
Yes. I think if you look at the database standpoint, let's kind of be honest. If you think about the number one open source database, the database which is kind of the most commonly used for new applications, it's not MySQL anymore, it's Postgres. But the MySQL is still very strong, and it's going nowhere for many decades. The thing is, the databases are very, very sticky.
Yeah.
Right?
Because once you've established a database, you've formatted all your data in a way that suits that database. Yeah, that's virtually.
Yeah, absolutely, right. And also, like I mentioned, in many cases, databases are like plumbing. You don't particularly care about them so much, right? If a database works and works well, you don't need to replace it, which is kind of very expensive and complicated value proposition.
That's Peter Zaitsev. And I wonder, Ghislaine, from your point of view, what has made MySQL so important? What if you had to sum it up in your own words, why should we care about MySQL?
Well, I think its reliability and ease of use, and the fact that it's kept its performance in place for 30 years, is very important, just to give it praise for that, really. But the fact it's open source and cross-platform and user-friendly, it's been seen as much more intuitive, It was very carefully made in that way. But what I like most about it is that it's got a very strong community ecosystem around it. And I guess that is because of its length of being, because it's built up millions of users who actually all help fix the bugs, contribute code, create new features, and they have community organised meetups too. And apparently, if you've got a problem with your MySQL, you're rarely stuck for long because somebody's going to have the same issue and they'll help straight away. So I like that about it, that it's actually everyone working together on what is really needed, these very intuitive scenarios where you can just pull up what you need from your database.
And to give an idea of the kind of love for MySQL out there, there's a bit of folklore around its logo, isn't there?
There is. It's a dolphin, which if you look it up, you'll probably recognise, even though in some ways we know, MySQL isn't necessarily a big known name out there, even though we're all using it, like you said, at the back end of what we're doing. But the dolphin's called Sakila, and that also was chosen in a worldwide community competition. It wasn't something that they took a big branding firm to. It was actually a Swedish woman that came up with it. And I think it's a mixture of two languages. And it was the logo was the dolphin. But later, Sakila became their sample database, which is that kind of pre-structured collection of tables and relationships between them and the data that you need linked to it, which I think the example they use most often for this is like if you were a video rental shop or there's not so many video rental shops around now, are there? But if you were renting out stuff, you just literally box link to box link to box link to box that you can actually very simply search into to find out what you need to do about your data. So it also became a baseline sample database, Sakila.
what about the future for such databases?
Well, that's interesting, isn't it? I was doing a bit of research into that because I thought, well, everything's moving so fast that, of course, databases must be too. And I think that MySQL is probably moving with the times. It seems to be that the AI designing and using in real time the event-driven database is on the horizon, which would be quite incredible. Decentralized, more able to work on low connectivity environments, syncing intermittently with cloud systems, but still handling local transactions, that whole edge side of things. And also, I think what we'll see happening is the kind of convergence of relational databases with document and graph models for coming into single systems. But of course, the big thing for the future is privacy. And I think that's what everyone seems to be talking about at the moment, is how you have built-in encryption, as we know, because so much hacking happens of databases. Yeah. So, and there's a phrase out there called zero knowledge databases, which link to zero trust architectures. These are areas that probably we should hit in another show full on, actually. What does this mean for our futures, where the databases that we've got, and we need them to be like, whether it's our, whether we're in a health database or our banking database, that are really encrypted to a level that people can't get into them because they actually don't allow knowledge to be taken out, and they don't allow anything which is not trusted to go into it.
Well, you've certainly heard of it now. So, folks, just before we leave it, if you like this edition, you can hear even more in our extended subscription version of the show for just, $10 a month. You can have a bit of extra somewhere on earth. Just type in somewhere on earth pod.fan. That's somewhere on earth pod.fan into your search bar, and you should be directed to our Pod Extra page. And we'd really appreciate it. It does help us keep the lights on around here. And we do dish up a bit of Pod Extra material, including today, actually, more discussion around those deepfake generators and really what can be done about them. So there's a fascinating about 7 more minutes of that we can offer you for the subscription version this month. Other than that, just remains for all of us on the team. That's production manager Liz Tuohy and editor and producer Ania Lichtarowicz, and me, Gareth, to say thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. It's Michael Calore, Director of Consumer Tech and Culture at Wired, here with my colleagues, senior writer Lauren Good.
Hello.
And Wired contributor Zoe Schiffer.
Hey, everyone.
We're here to tell you about our new podcast, Uncanny Valley, a show about the people, power, and influence of Silicon Valley.
Every week, we get together to talk about how technology and culture from the Valley is influencing our everyday lives.
We dig into questions like, will we ever get our privacy back? Is OpenAI for real? And how are Silicon Valley billionaires impacting U.S. elections?
The first episode of Uncanny Valley comes out on October 31st. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.